Shalom! It is I, Timmy from Tim Jong-un Productions, and I just came back from Tribeca Film Festival, my very first film festival experience. I was at the Tribeca Film Festival through some connections that I had, and honestly, I was there and I was like, this is all fun and dandy and all, but what's the point of getting press passes to a festival for free if I can't make content out of it? Which is why I guess I'm making this video, to make content out of it. But in all seriousness, I had a really fun time at Tribeca, and I definitely would come back again, though after the end of this video, I can't imagine getting an invitation back, but it was really great. I thought my very first film festival experience was a really good one, and honestly, I really want to go to more, whether it be this one or just other ones in general. So, yeah, so this is going to be more of a loose, unrestrained type video. I'm not really working off a script because I saw a lot of movies at Tribeca, and I don't really have time to write a review for every single thing that I saw, so I'm going to keep this as loose and hopefully as short as possible. So for those of you who don't know, I saw 13 films at Tribeca Film Festival, which may sound like a lot, but if you really look into how many films were at the festival, there were like over 100, so naturally there was just no possible way for me to see every single thing, and plus I arrived at the festival like 4 or 5 days after it started, so already I was kind of falling behind, so there was just no way I was going to see everything, and unfortunately the things that I did want to see, I just didn't have a chance to see, either because they were conflicting with the other film that I was trying to watch, or they were just playing too late, but either way, I felt like I saw a good chunk amount, so I guess we can talk about it then. Let's get this started. So the first thing I saw at Tribeca Film Festival was Chasing Amy, directed by Sav Rogers. Now this is a documentary about the making of the 1997 Kevin Smith film Chasing Amy, as you can clearly tell. So I had never seen the original, sorry, I don't know why I'm saying original. I had never seen Chasing Amy prior to seeing this documentary, so before I saw Chasing Amy, I saw Chasing Amy, and yeah, it was not good. It definitely wasn't for me. There were definitely great things about the film. I think Joey Lauren-Adams' performance was awesome. I thought she was the best part about the film, and, you know, some of the writing, I guess, was pretty solid, and there were a couple of like monologues and like dramatic scenes that I thought were like kind of well presented and well written, but overall I just think that, you know, without getting too much into it, I think it's very dated. I think it's very kind of incel-y, I guess, if that's the right word. It just felt like a really dated and narrow-minded perspective on something like this. And, you know, I just thought it, and even in spite of that, I didn't even think it was that interesting of a film. I wasn't that invested in Ben Affleck's character, and I thought, you know, there wasn't a lot of meat that I was really sinking my teeth into, but, you know, either way, I thought it was whatever, kind of not really my thing. But the documentary, Chasing Amy, very much was my thing. I really enjoyed this one. So it's weird. This is a documentary that's technically on paper about the making of this film, Chasing Amy, but that's kind of just part of the film. It's also just a deep insight into the director Sav Rogers' life as well. You know, the film starts with this TED Talk that Sav gave back in, I think, 2014, you know, just a couple years back, and where he kind of discusses, like, what about this film really spoke to him, like what about this film meant to him and why it's resonated with him and stuck with him ever since he saw it since he was a kid, and, you know, he's seen it multiple times, and, you know, he discusses how that TED Talk blew up, about how eventually Kevin Smith, the director, saw it, how Ben Affleck and Joey Lauren-Adams saw it, and it kind of led to a deep exploration about, you know, how he kind of became the person that he is because of this film, how he became a director, how he eventually met his then girlfriend turned fiance turned wife, how he kind of became the person that he is, how, you know, this experience, he very much shares a lot of deep insights into his personal life as well, about his relationship with his parents, his mom specifically. He shares like a good chunk through about his gender-affirming surgery. You know, it's a very deep personal story about the director himself. It's not just a film about the making of Chasing Amy, although that is a part of it, but it intertwines with how it's affected with the director's life. And I think for the most part, he does a really great job of communicating why this movie means so much to him, why he became the person that he is because of Chasing Amy. And there were a lot of like great moments where I was just, my jaw was kind of agape. I was like, wow, this is like really powerful. Like near the end of the film, there's a moment where Sav interviews just Joey Lauren Adams, and she kind of explains this sort of bittersweet experience she had with the film, where she's like, I mean, overall she's proud of making the movie, but she's had a lot of bad memories with the film as well. You know, she talks about her experience with Harvey Weinstein, about how he was just a genuine piece of shit. I mean, he is a piece of shit, but like even back then, before people knew he was a genuine, like, terrible person, she talks about how making the movie kind of strained her relationship with Kevin Smith, who she was dating back in the day. So, you know, it's a very insightful and very honest documentary about, you know, not just the director, but just the people involved as well. And, you know, it definitely tugged at my heartstrings. I was definitely super invested for a good chunk. It's crazy, like, for a movie supposedly about the making of this film, the least interesting parts about the film were just all the stuff relating to the actual, like, movie itself. Like, I wasn't that interested in, like, how this movie got made. I was more interested in the people involved, you know. I was more interested in Sav's story. So in that sense, that's why, like, it wasn't like 100% perfect or anything. You know, there was just more parts that I found more compelling and more interesting, but those parts I found compelling were really, really compelling. So yeah, and then overall it's just a really well presented, really nice documentary. Like, I had a great time with this. This was a great film to start at Tribeca. So yeah, there's not much more I can say. Sav, if you're watching this, hope you make more stuff, because I want to see more stuff from you. I think you've got a great future. 7 out of 10. I think it's a good film. The next film I saw at Tribeca was Elemental, the new, well, I guess it's not new since it's been in out recently, the latest Pixar joint. You know, going in, I didn't really have that high of expectations, because even before the film got a public release, people were kind of like shit-talking the film anyway, and apparently, like, even back then, it was projected to be like the second lowest, like, grossing Pixar film opening or something like I don't remember. You know, and I wasn't that impressed by the trailers for this film, but I still kind of wanted to see it. I still was, like, intrigued to kind of see what kind of experience that I would get. I really loved, aside from Lightyear, I really loved the past couple of Pixar films that the studios released. I thought Soul was, like, one of their best films since, like, their heydays, you know, their days of Toy Story, Monsters Inc., Finding Nemo, Wall-E, Up, all those movies. And I really love Turning Red. If you've seen my best of 2022 video, I don't remember what year that was. Turning Red was on my list, I think, right? I don't know. But I was intrigued to see this, and it was fine. It was okay. It was definitely not as bad as I was expecting, but it was also not good either. It's weird. It felt like Pixar just kind of took all their movies and fed it to ChatGPT and basically told ChatGPT to make a Pixar film based on the things that it fed it. And this was kind of the result of this, because it was weird. It felt more like a weird parody of a Pixar film than an actual Pixar film, because there were so many moments where the movie is just hitting the normal beats of what you normally expect in a Pixar film, you know, a wacky introduction, you know, introducing this new wacky world. Then, you know, once it gets to the second act, that's when it gets serious. It gets really dark and kind of mature, emotionally mature. And then by the end, you're like crying, it's pulling your heartstrings, you know, you're like kind of like, it's like an emotional relief after all the sad things that happen, you know. It's like they hit all the basically generic points that you'd see in a Pixar film, but it doesn't earn any of these moments. Like, it doesn't earn anything that it's trying to achieve. It just does them and it expects you to care, but you don't care about any of the characters. Like, the characters definitely have charisma. Like, I can totally see why, because the film is like kind of like a rom-com type thing, and the characters do have chemistry, but the characters themselves are just so flat and so one-dimensional. It's like, you can only go so far as to make me want to care about the characters. Like, and I feel like, you know, this film, it's clearly trying to be reminiscent of things like Inside Out or like Wall-E or something like that, in terms of like presenting like a story between like inanimate objects in this like crazy world, but it doesn't develop the world in any way. Like, you get like small insights into the world. You can see like this weird like cyclone, tornado, baseball game, basketball game, whatever thing happening, and you get insights like how like the fire tribe, the northern fire tribe, are kind of secluded in their old world in Elemental City, but it doesn't do anything with this. Like, it also, like, the metaphors in this film are just the most obvious surface level on the nose things like ever. Like if you thought Zootopia was unsubtle, then like this is like even more unsubtle. This is even more in your face. Like all the bits about like racism, elemental racism, and about like immigration and like firstborn generation, like sons and daughters and stuff. It's not subtle in any way. It's just so in your face. But even, and I wouldn't minded that if the film actually did something with these, but it's just, they don't do anything with this. It's just, like I said, the most surface level observations ever. Like, it's just, they just do the bare minimum to get things going before they just move on to something else. Like, it feels like this film is like conflicting with itself. Like, it can't decide if it wants to be a romance between Shark Boy and Lava Girl, or if it wants to be this story about, like, you know, being the first generation, like, child of a family of immigrants. Like, it can't decide between the two, but, like, it doesn't do either very well. It almost does. Like, it half-asses both, but it doesn't do both. It doesn't do either well either. So it's like, you're just kind of left with this jumbled, really just sort of substanceless mess, and it's disappointing. And I think that if they went about this in a different way, I think if they went about this, you know, in more just like, if the characters were better written, if I think if the film was just longer, maybe they would have solved this problem. But it's just not something that I really connected with, and I wanted to. Like, I could see elements of a great film in there somewhere, but I just did not connect with this whatsoever. I really wanted to like it, but oh well, you know, like, it's bombing. Apparently it's bombing really hard, which makes sense, because it's like, after the release of Spider-Verse, it's like, we just want the most like the best of best when it comes to animation. It's like, we can't settle for mediocrity anymore, you know? So, you know, I don't want Pixar to fail. You know, I have a nostalgic attachment to Pixar, but, you know, this is not one of their best films. It's not horrible. It's like, you could seriously watch worse animated films this year than this. Like, this wasn't as bad as like the Mario movie or anything like that, but like, yeah, this was not something great either. You could skip this and like literally not get much out of it. So, yeah, 5 out of 10. It was whatever. Another film I saw was Maggie Moore's. This is I was going to say directorial debut, but apparently this guy made another movie before this. So the new film from John Slattery, the Mad Men guy and Tony Stark's dad. It stars John Hamm, Tina Fey, Nate the Great from Ted Lasso, and some other people, and yeah, this was awful. I hated this film. This movie was clearly inspired by Coen Brothers fare, specifically Fargo and what's the other one? Burn After Reading. Yeah, that was it. Burn After Reading. And the inspirations were just so obvious. Like, there were so many like characters and plot points that were like, this is just Fargo. Like, this was just like trying to be a Coen Brothers like murder mystery, like noir, like dark comedy type thing. Because a lot of the humor, like, and a lot of like character quirks were trying to be inspired by like a Coen Brothers like type film. Like John Hamm, like, for some reason, like, he has this weird obsession about like not dating women who like leave food on their mouth and don't wipe it away, or something like that, and it never comes back again. It's like every single character has this like weird quirk or weird thing about themselves that it literally doesn't matter in the long run. Like, they just introduce it because for jokes, I guess. Like, they just introduce random character quirks and random like shticks about specific people, but it doesn't add to anything. Like, it's just completely forgotten about by like the next like 20 to 30 minutes. So, they just do it because I guess, the Coen brothers have their own shticks, their characters are also quirky, but it's like if John Slattery like just kind of took the most bare bones surface level approach to how the Coens make their films and just did that, because that's what this feels like. It just feels like more of like some weird parody of a Coen brothers film than like something that they would actually make. And to give it some credit, it's also trying to go for its own thing as well, but like it doesn't do anything very well. It just couldn't decide if it wanted to be this like police procedural about like a double murder, or if it wanted to be like this rom-com between John Hamm and Tina Fey. Like it was completely jumbled. The tone was just so inconsistently clear, and I just could never understand what the film was going for whatsoever. Like there were some fun scenes. I will admit that there were some fun moments where it's like, okay, that's kind of fun, or yeah, that's kind of clever. I kind of liked that, but these moments were just so sparse. They were just so in between the greater of things. And I guess I was just kind of expecting more. I mean, I guess I don't even know what I was expecting, because I've never seen a John Slattery directed film before, so I guess maybe this is his style. Like, I don't know. Yes, but the first like hour and a half, I guess, like maybe, well, no, that's the entire runtime. Let me rephrase that. The first like hour of this film, it was bad, but it wasn't like offensively bad, and I was like, like this is not great, but whatever. I guess I could keep watching this or whatever. But the last like 30 minutes of the film was tremendously awful. It was genuinely like horrible. Like there's this like car chase involving Tina Fey and like the bad guy in the film, and they just use GoPro shots in that car chase for some reason. I was like, oh my god, really? Are we being for real right now? And there were so many moments, and it's just, and the way that scene ends, I'm not going to spoil anything if you're interested in seeing the film, but the way that car chase ends, I think I burst out laughing, and it clearly wasn't trying to be funny. It clearly wasn't trying to be like intentionally funny or anything. So like, yeah, that's what like dropped down my score by another one for this film. It was so just terribly incompetent. Like, I wish I had more to say, but like the film was just kind of forgettable. Like by the time I left the theater, like 30 to 40 minutes later, I just like completely forgot like half the stuff I saw, and it wasn't like a funny bad type thing. It was just kind of unbearable to sit through. Like, I don't want to see this again, like I'd rather just watch an actual Coen brothers film. So yeah, that's all I got to say. 3 out of 10. Another film I saw was The Miracle Club. This is a film that's apparently been like 20 years in the making, I guess. Like, apparently, like, it's been in production for that long, and one of the actresses, Maggie Smith, was like involved that entire time. And well, I mean, if this is the film they wanted to make, good on them, I guess. Because for me, this was so boring. I was so bored watching this film. I genuinely at points was struggling to stay awake because literally like nothing was happening whatsoever. Like, this film is basically an Oscar bait movie. No, it's not basically. It is an Oscar bait movie. This film screams Oscar bait. Like, this movie feels like it was made to win some Oscars, which is crazy that this movie was like in development hell for so long. Like, people actually wanted to make this, but like this is the best thing that they could produce. Like, it was just, there's nothing like inherently wrong with the film. Like, a lot of the performances were actually great. Like, that's the best thing I can say about the film. It's very well acted. Like, Maggie Smith is really great in the film. I really loved her performance. Laura Linney was also really good, and Kathy Bates is great as always. Like, it's not like a badly acted film, and the film clearly has a lot of production value. Like, it has nice sets, it looks nice, it doesn't look like poorly shot or incompetent or anything like that, but like, yeah, but overall it's a film that just thinks it's like this important grand piece. It has this sense of self-importance to it, but what it's saying is just so like surface level and so just like nonchalant. It's just like they make this like claim, because the whole point of this film is like, oh, miracles are real, miracles can happen, because like the film's like trying to be like this like feminist set piece for like the first like 30 minutes where it's like the wives want to go to like France or something for like a religious getaway, but like their husbands are like, no, you can't go, yeah, you're a woman, like you have to stay in the house and cook and clean and blah 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 blah, you know. It's like, and the first 30 minutes was so tonally inconsistent. Like the music was trying to communicate this like, oh, like quirky comedy type thing, but then the rest of the film isn't like that whatsoever. It's just super serious and super dramatic, and I was like, what are they going for here? Like tonally, it's just so inconsistent, and like the themes are just so jumbled too. Like it's trying to talk about so many things. It's trying to talk about like being an Irish woman in like the 1950s or 60s, whenever this takes place, but it's also trying to have this theme about like miracles and whether they can happen, and like also comment about like religion and stuff like that. It's like, just like pick one. Like it was trying to be so many things, but it doesn't do or explore any of these things very well. It's just like, it's just an Oscar bait movie. It's just, this film just, a lot of the scenes just feel like those moments where like they just play before like, and this actress is nominated for this like Academy Award and stuff. Like, it's just, yeah, it was just so boring. I was so uninvested and so uninterested with what's going on. Like, and I remember less about this film than I did with Maggie Moore's. Like, Maggie Moore's, like, at least, like, it was noticeably bad, so, like, I could remember more things that happened in this one. But this one was just, like, there's nothing inherently wrong with it. Like I said, it's technically a decent film, but it's just, there's nothing I'm gonna remember about this. Like, I already forgot, like, 90% of what I saw. Like, the only things I can really remember are the performances, and the performances are great, but that's about it. Like, the film just has nothing else for me to offer. So, yeah, 5 out of 10. Another film I saw was First-Time Female Director, directed by Chelsea Peretti. So I'm a huge fan of Chelsea Peretti. Her character Gina from Brooklyn Nine-Nine, she was always one of my favorite characters in that show, and I really enjoy her stand-up comedy, and I quite enjoyed a lot of her characters in Kroll Show. So going in, I was kind of excited to see this film because, you know, I like the person directing and starring in the film. It features several actors and actresses that I really like, you know, like Amy Poehler, Max Greenfield, you know, all these other people. So I was kind of excited, but also kind of curious as to what this would be, because I hadn't seen like a single trailer for this film. All I knew is that it was going to be like essentially like a, you know, mockumentary style office comedy, and it was basically kind of what I expected, but it also kind of sucked. You know, like I mentioned before, the film is essentially shot, it basically is shot like a mockumentary. Like, it's basically shot like it was an episode of The Office or Parks and Recreation or something like that, but at least in those two, there's at least purpose for why it's being shot like that. Like, the characters are self-aware that they're being shot, and they even like conduct interviews with the people that they're shooting the cameras with, you know, and like a lot of the best kinds of humor are elicited because of the fact that it's shot as a mockumentary. But like here, there's like zero purpose as to why it's shot like this. Like, there's zero purpose as to why it's shot like an episode of Parks and Rec or The Office. Like, it adds absolutely nothing. And it's not like the characters are like self-aware that they have cameras recording them. Like, they're pretty much like unaware about the fact that they're being recorded. So I'm just sitting here going like, why is it being shot this way? Like, why isn't this shot like a normal comedy? Like, I guess I can commend the film for trying to be a bit different, but when the different is bad, it's just, you know, it's just bad, you know. And you know, technically there's a plot, there's technically this story about, you know, Chelsea Peretti's character becomes a first-time female director after the original director, played by Tim Heidecker, had to leave because of some no-no stuff. And, you know, the film constantly makes clear through the Andy Richter character that, like, she was literally no one's first, second, or third choice, basically, and that's kind of the joke for the first, like, 10 to 15 minutes, and kind of the rest of the movie, because the film kind of, like, highlights how much of the play that she's directing is like a train wreck, about how like she's kind of like, oh, like, I think I know what I'm doing, you know, I totally am in control of this situation, but then she like changes her approach, her directorial approach, like 3 different times throughout the film. Like, there are elements about this film that I think are amusing, and sometimes the way that these scenes are presented are amusing, but a lot of the film is just, it just feels like a bunch of random sketches mashed together into one film. but not all the sketches land, you know? Like, maybe this is just a personal preference, because when I saw it, a lot of people that I was seeing it with, like, were laughing pretty consistently. I didn't find a lot of the gags really that funny. I thought they were, like, at most, like, kind of chuckle-worthy, but yeah, just, it's more of, like, a personal preference, like, what you find comedically funny, but I was just not, the first, like, half, a good chunk of this film was just not amusing to me whatsoever. I was just like, oh my god, just get this over with, like, get on with it, you know? And, like, I can see kind of, like, a great film in here somewhere, you know, because the film kind of explores this theme about, like, trying to be, like, a female director, or, like, being a woman in, like a high profile, like, leadership position like this, but because they aren't given the same support as, like, men in this kind of similar situation, they're kind of, like, almost doomed to fail, so they have, like, even harder, like, obstacles to overcome to succeed. But the film doesn't do anything with this theme. It's like, it's just like the other two I mentioned. It makes the most surface level observations ever, and then just goes nowhere with it. Because, like, the film's priority is to be essentially just a glorified SNL, like, digital short. Its goal is to just be a bunch of sketches, like, put together as one film. And that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is, like, this is a film. Like, this isn't, like, a random SNL sketch where you can just have, like, random shenanigans happen for, like, 4 to 5 minutes and then call it a day. Like, this is a film. Like, there needs to be a cohesive story. There needs to be, like, thematic elements tying the film together, and there's none of that. Like, it just feels like random things happening and then the movie ends, you know? Like, yeah, some of the sketch bits are funny. Yes, some of the jokes are funny, but that alone can't carry a movie. And yeah, it just, I just, the whole time I was just sitting here going, like, why isn't this a TV show? Like, why isn't this a series? Like, it's practically shot like a series anyway, and if the film is just going to be, like, a Kroll show type, just sketches just happen for days, then why don't you make this a show? Like, from what I saw, it seemed more appropriate as a series anyway, and if Peretti was truly interested in, like, exploring these themes about, like, women and, like, how they don't have a lot of support in these leadership positions as men do, like, you would also have more time to develop that and explore that as a show. But as a film, it feels so rushed. It feels like just things happen and then it's over. And yeah, it was just really underwhelming. I was just not satisfied with a lot of what was going on, you know? Like, again, it was funny. It was kind of funny, you know? I laughed every now and then, but, like, again, that can't be the end-all be-all of things, you know? Like, when I think of films that are consistently funny, you know, like Monty Python or something like that, and The Holy Grail. Monty Python and The Holy Grail, like, it's a consistently funny film, but it's not just jokes. It's about how those jokes are presented and set up, and, like, you know, the fact that, like, they couldn't afford horses, so they use coconuts to, like, imitate the fact that they're riding horses. Like, things like this, like, it adds to the film, but also in of itself is funny, and there's nothing like that in this film, so yeah, overall, not my cup of tea. People seem to like it, but I didn't care for it. 4 out of 10. The next film I saw was The Blackening, the new Tim Story joint, and if you're at all familiar with this guy's filmography, then this is, you know, kind of what you should be expecting. This was kind of bad. This was not kind of. This was really bad. This was just such torture. The first, like, 45 minutes of this film was genuinely unbearable. Like, I was actually considering just leaving the theater at a certain point, because not only were the jokes just super obvious and just, again, the most surface level things imaginable, it was also just not funny either. Like, you know, I understand that this film is trying to be more of a comedy than it is a horror film, even though it's technically a horror comedy, but, like, I just didn't feel like it did both well either. Like, it definitely got more entertaining and it got more funny as the film went on during the second half, but yeah, just overall, this was just a really underwhelming experience. Like, the horror elements were not scary whatsoever. It's basically just every other slasher film you've ever seen ever, except even more underwhelming, if you can imagine that. But it wasn't funny either. Like, the jokes were just, again, like, the film is trying to be this, like, I guess, commentary on, like, tropes pertaining to black characters in, like, horror films and stuff. But unlike something like a Jordan Peele film, like Get Out or something, like, not only are the jokes, like, smart, they're cleverly written and they're funny, but the film itself is also super engaging. Like, it's incredibly, like, Get Out, for example, is really well presented. It's really well shot, and all the characters are really interesting, and they're definitely absurd, but it adds to the comedy, you know? It's like, that's what Jordan Peele excels at. He excels at making a film feel really, really stupid in a funny kind of way, but also really terrifying, you know, adding to the horror elements of those films. And this movie didn't do either well, like, whatsoever. Like, the comedy sucked, the horror sucked. You know, the characters can be entertaining. They definitely had a lot of chemistry. I think that's the best thing I can say about the film. It's that, like, the actors playing the characters certainly seemed like they were having a fun time, and you can tell because they had a lot of chemistry with each other. You know, they bounced off each other pretty well, but that has nothing to do with the actual, like, presentation of the film. It has nothing to do with how the film was shot. And it's just like, I felt like this was such a missed potential too, because you could have really kind of, like, gone all the way into making the film look and act like an older, like, 80s film or something like that, you know, like, really added to the whole, like, oh, we're commenting up, like, the cliches and tropes pertaining to black characters in horror films. Like, I didn't love Ty West's X or Pearl, but I feel like what makes those films particularly interesting is that the director went out of his way to make both of those films look and present as if they were films from those time periods. You know, like, X looks and feels like a grimy old 70s film back in the day, and, like, Pearl looks and is presented like some, like, weird, like, Wizard of Oz type, like, 50s era film or something like that. You know, like, I wish they did something like that, but this film just, like, it outside of the kind of meta jokes, like, how is this any different from any other, like, generic slasher movie ever? Like, nothing. There's zero difference whatsoever. And, you know, it's the whole film is just it's just one big joke. Like, that's it. Like, the whole joke is, like, oh, commenting on, like, you know, how, like, what it means to be black, you know, black identity in, you know, not just America, but, like, in a horror film specifically. And it could be fun. They could have done something with that, but they just do nothing. It's just like first time female director. It's like they could have gone somewhere with this idea, with these themes, but they just go about it in the most obvious surface level way imaginable. It's just like watching an SNL sketch, like, extended for an hour and a half basically, and then the movie's over. Like, I don't know. Like, I mean, again, seems like a personal preference type thing, because when I saw it with a crowd, they seemed to be really into it. They found it really entertaining. They found it really funny. I didn't find it funny or entertaining whatsoever, but again, it seems like a personal preference type thing. I really wanted more out of this, but, you know, whatever. I guess I can't get what I want. Yeah, 3 out of 10. It was bad. After that, I saw a documentary called Comedy of War, Laughter in Ukraine. So this is basically a documentary about comedians in Ukraine going around doing stand-up comedy while the war in Ukraine is going on. It's kind of them just kind of explaining how they can contribute to the war effort. A lot of the film is just them going to Ukrainian military bases and just performing not sketch comedy, like stand-up comedy for the soldiers operating at that base, you know, kind of them, like, lightening the mood and giving them a little morale boost, you know, while they're fighting this terrible, horrible war against a shitbag in Russia. And, you know, there are parts about this that I liked. It's kind of weird. This is, out of everything that I saw, this was, like, the shortest film that I saw at the festival. And I'm saying that as kind of a bad thing, because it didn't feel like I watched a whole movie. It felt like I watched, like, the first half of, like, a 3-hour-long documentary. And that first half just gets stretched out forever and ever and ever. Like, at a certain point, like, I was super, super interested for the first, like, I don't know, 30 minutes of the documentary. But then after that, it just felt so repetitive. It just felt like we were just exploring the same information over and over again. You know, like the parts, at a certain point, the parts that I found interesting had nothing to do with the comedians, had nothing to do with, like, the actual, like, comedy. What I found interesting were when the comedians, like, were visiting like, the destructed ruins of, like, old Ukrainian towns and cities that used to be prosperous, but then have been reduced to rubble because of, you know, Russian invasions and Russian bombing and stuff like that. Like, these were the things that I found interesting. These were the things I wanted to learn more about, and we get some pretty deep insights into them, and I liked these bits, but then it just cuts back to things that I'm already saw, like, just like them doing like stand-up comedy, and like I understand that like that's what the film is more interested in, but again, like I just wish it was presented in a way that just didn't feel so repetitive, because that's how it felt. Like it felt like a 90-minute doc that already blew its load for already blew its load for like the first 30 minutes, and then it's just kind of trudging along for the rest of like the 90-minute runtime. Like I was just at a certain point, I wish I was invested, but I just wasn't. It just got super repetitive and boring, and again, like I felt like there's more to the documentary. Like I felt like I missed a second part of the film, but it just ends. Like at a certain point, like it's building up to this big thing, but then it just ends, and I'm just like, well, what's the point of this then? Like, I don't know. I super really great 30 minutes of the first for 30 minutes. I was super into it. At best I can say I was like kind of mildly entertained. Like I was kind of mildly engaged with what was going on, but then at a certain point my interest just fell off. I was just like, okay, I get it, like this would have worked as like a quick like 15-20 minute like Vice like video that you'd find on their YouTube channel or something, but like as a documentary I just felt like it was kind of lacking. So but whatever. So 4 out of 10. After that I saw Michael Shannon's directorial debut, Eric LaRue, and this was really boring. So the premise of this film is that it's kind of like We Need to Talk About Kevin or Mass, where it's about a school shooting, but instead of being told from the kid's perspective, it's told from the parents' perspective, particularly from Judy Greer's character's perspective, who is the mother of the school shooter who killed 3 people. It's... I'll just say the best thing about the film. The best thing about the movie are the performances. Like, Judy Greer is awesome in the movie. Like, she gives a genuinely fantastic performance. I thought she was really great. I pretty much believed, her character. I understood her pain and stuff like that. And Alexander Skarsgård, who plays her husband, was also great in the film. I thought he was also really engaging to watch. But the problem with this film is that it's 2 hours long, and yet it keeps dicking around about what it wants to be. Like, it feels like 3 different films being presented at the same time, but it just completely, like, I was gonna say half-ass, but that's for 2 things, so I guess, like, a third-ass? 3 things at the same time? Like, it's trying to be a film about, like, school shooting and how it's, like, affecting American, like, teenagers and affecting like Americans as a whole, American society. It's trying to be a film about religion and how people use religion to cope with their like tragedies, but also how like religion can like overtake a person because of that. And it's also trying to be a character piece about like Judy Greer trying to get over the fact that her son's a murderer. It's like, again, it's just like what I said about the Miracle Club. Just pick one. Just like pick one thing that you want to be and then narrow in on that. Like, the film just like completely dicks around for like 2/3 of its film, where it's like, I have no idea what's going on. Like, I have no idea where things are going. Like, the first 2/3 of this film was so like boring to sit through. Like, I was genuinely trying to stay awake because they just do the same thing over and over again. Like, it's just like Judy Greer and Alexander Skarsgård argue about like which church of theirs is more kino in terms of them helping them deal with their shit. Then they both individually go to their specific churches and deal with their problems, and then like things go awry, and then they come back home and they argue again, and it's just that over and over and over again. Like, it's just, you would think for a film that's 2 hours long, they would like do something with that runtime, but it does nothing. It's just, again, it's just the same thing over and over again. And like, to me, like, this isn't like an inherently bad film or anything. Like, I think if you kind of re-edited this and like kind of did things a bit differently, like, you could probably get a great film out of this. Like, like the last like 20 minutes of the movie were genuinely great. There's a scene near the end involving Judy Greer and her son where they have like a conversation, and that was my favorite part of the whole film. I was like, okay, we're finally getting into something interesting. Like, this is really great. I can't wait to see where it goes. But then it just ends. Then it just rolls to credits, and I was like, what? Like, that's the end? Like, but that was the best part about the film, but it's over already. And it's like, this felt like such a waste of time. It was just dicking around until it finally got to the point where it finally was confident, I guess, about what it wanted to be. But by then, like, the credits roll, and I was like, wow, that was like a waste of time. Like, I felt like if they re-edited this film and took that last 20 minutes and made that the beginning, and maybe you just like cut like half of what happens in the rest of the film, I mean, it still wouldn't be perfect, it still wouldn't be great, but you would have a much better movie than what you have right now. Like, this was just a nothing experience. Like, I forgot like half of what happened like already by like 15-20 minutes after I left the theater. This was just so underwhelming. I just did not care about anything that was going on, and I wanted to. Like, I could understand, I could clearly tell it was trying to go for something like We Need to Talk About Kevin or Mass, but it's just like it didn't excel at anything that it wanted to achieve. It was just like dilly-daddling for a bunch, and then it just ends. Like, I don't know, whatever. It's like a 4 or 5 out of 10. I don't know. I guess I'll just say 4. I think that's a better representation of how I feel. So, yeah. So the next film I saw was a movie called Blood for Dust, directed by Rod Blackhurst. And this was a weird one because this film, if you've seen a neo-noir western, sorry, not neo-noir western, that implies something different. If you've ever seen a neo-western ever in your life, if you've ever seen like Yellowstone or Hell for High Water or literally all these other things, if you've seen No Country for Old Men, you basically can predict every single thing that happens in this film. Like, this movie has the most predictable story that you can possibly imagine for a film like this. You know, like a guy down on his luck or whatever, and then he encounters a criminal friend from his past, and they, you know, band together to do some criminal shenanigans and screw over the main boss, but then they screw each other off, and then one of them runs away with the money. You know, things like every single bit about this film was just the most predictable thing you can imagine. Like, it's almost kind of like a AI generated type script where it just hits all the cliches and beats that you'd expect for a movie like this. But I feel like in spite of that, you know, the film was still entertaining. It was still like fun to watch, you know, at least as fun as you could expect from a film within the genre, you know, like a lot of the action scenes were pretty entertaining, like the gunfights particularly. Like, the last like second half of this film was just loaded with gunfights after gunfights, but it was really entertaining. Like, the way they pulled off the actual like gunshots themselves, I really liked how the gunshots sounded and stuff like that, and the way that like there's no like sweltering like music accompanying like the action scenes. It was very much like this is a no BS, just like in your face style type, like cowboy style like gunfights and things like that, and it was really entertaining for the most part. And the film was really well shot, surprisingly. Like, I really liked the cinematography. I thought the use of lighting was really impressive, and a lot of the actors were pretty good as well. Like Scoot McNairy, I thought was really great for this specific type of character, and Kit Harington, who's also in the film, he plays like his criminal buddy. His accent was kind of hard to get through, if I'm being honest. Like, the first time I heard it, I kind of chuckled to myself. I was like, God, that was bad. That was terrible. But I don't know, as the film went along, I kind of got used to it, you know, like it was less annoying or offensive or egregious or anything. I just kind of got used to his accent. And by the end, I was like, yeah, I can see, I mean, I can still see Kit Harington. He was still just doing, you know, Kit Harington-isms, but like, you know, he was eventually able to kind of like bleed into his character, essentially. And yeah, I mean, there's not much else I can say, honestly, because there isn't really much else to say. It's just, if you like neo-westerns, if you like gunfights and like gritty, like El Camino, Hell or High Water style, like, you know, grimy crime films like this, then, you know, you're gonna love it. You're gonna get a lot out of this, you know. It's no masterpiece by any means, you know. I will take No Country for Old Men or something like that any day of the week over this. But, you know, this wasn't bad. This was kind of entertaining, and I was kind of, you know, engaged from beginning to end. You know, again, nothing amazing. The script is predictable, the story is predictable, but, you know, if you know that going in, you know, you won't have a bad time. So yeah, 6 out of 10, I guess. The next film I saw was The Good Half, starring one of the Jonas brothers and directed by Jason Schwartzman brother. And this was easily the worst film I saw at Tribeca Film Festival. Holy God, I don't even know where to start with this movie. Like, imagine for a second the most cliched, generic, like, by the numbers, like, indie comedy drama you could possibly imagine. And just, like, picture that in your head. And you have this film, essentially. Like, everything about this film is just the most generic, like, derivative thing I've ever seen ever. But unlike, what was the Blood for Dust, the neo-western that I mentioned before, like, at least that film, like, had some entertaining, like, bits. At least it had some fun action. And it was well shot. It was really, really well shot and lit. But this film doesn't even have that. Like, this is the most blandly stale directed shot film I think I've ever seen, like, of this year. Like, holy God, like, the way that this film presented is so boring and it's so generic. It's just like, and Nick Jonas can't act for shit. Like, I've never seen any other Nick Jonas movie. He was in, like, a bunch of, like, Disney Channel, Nickelodeon-ass, like, shows and movies, and I guess he was in Chaos Walking, I guess, but yeah, I don't know why the fuck they wanted Nick Jonas in this film. He can't act to save his life. He I guess he's trying to go for some, like, I guess he's trying to be like some John Hughes, like, type character where he's like, oh, he's sarcastic, but he's also, like, grieving about the fact, because the film's about, like, him trying to get over the fact that his mother's dead or something. His mom's played by Elizabeth Shue, and, him going to her funeral and trying to, like, cope with her mom's death and stuff like that. And it was just, like, I didn't believe a single word that came out of his mouth. Like, I didn't believe him when he was being sarcastic. I didn't believe him when he was grieving. I didn't believe him when he was trying to be dramatic. It's like, this he just can't act. And in his fake singing too, oh my God, there's a scene near some point halfway through the film where he's meeting this, like, therapist who, by the way, they just randomly meet in an airplane, and then that, I guess, like, defines their relationship. That in of itself establishes their relationship. He has to go up and, like, fake bad sing karaoke or whatever, and I've never listened to a single Jonas Brother, like, song or whatever, so I have no idea what his, like, caliber of singing is, but I guess he was trying to fake being bad, but the way he went about it was just, like, it was awful, like, but not in a way where it's like, haha, it's funny because Nick Jonas is a singer, but he's singing bad. It was just, like, bad in of itself, and I didn't know what I was supposed to get out of this. Like, is this trying to be funny? Is this him trying to, like, have a character arc? Like, I didn't know what was going on. And yeah, everything about this film, it's, like, just so bland and so poorly made. It's just like everything about it just pissed me off whatsoever. Like, there was nothing. There was no conflict whatsoever. It was just the characters just dicking around for an hour and a half and then calling it a day by pulling the end credits. It's like David Arquette's, like, I guess kind of the villain, but he's also not, because he was also Elizabeth Shue's second wife. I don't know what was happening in the film. And everyone else, like, wasn't as bad as Nick Jonas, but they didn't give, like, good performances either, like, and it's filled with actors that I generally like. I like Brittany Snow, and I like, Matt Walsh, not the Daily Wire, homophobic one, the other one who was, who's the funnier one, the guy. I like that one. It was fine, I guess, but I was just expecting more, and I don't even know why, because I had such low expectations based on what I heard about this film and, like, who was involved. And apparently I'm in the minority on this. Like, if you go on Letterboxd, like, people really, really loved this, and I have no idea why. I don't know why people are liking this. Like, this is just such a generic derivative by the numbers movie I think I've ever seen. Like, if someone made, like, a weird parody of, like, what an A24 movie would be, like, this would basically be it. Like, this is just nothing special whatsoever, and I hated every single minute of it. It's like, it wasn't even funny bad. It was just, like, just egregiously, like, offensively bad. Yeah, and I wish I can go more into detail about what I hated, but again, I forgot, like, 90% of this film. It's just, like, I remember my hatred and like, angry emotion towards this film more than I remember the film itself. It's like, that's how forgettable this film is. So, yeah, 2 out of 10. This was awful. Another film I saw was Stan Lee, the new Disney Plus documentary about Stan Lee, the guy, the legend himself. So this film was kind of weird. I'll just say this. I think for the most part, this is a pretty well-made documentary, like taking aside the fluff and what this film is about and kind of what the film had to do to present its story. I think if you take all that out and just look at the documentary as it is, like, it's a very well-made documentary. It's directed by David Gelb, I think you pronounce his name. It's the guy who directed the Jiro Dreams of Sushi documentary, which is a documentary I really like. I do like that one a lot, so that's kind of the reason why I even saw this, was because I saw it was made by the same guy who made Jiro Dreams of Sushi. And, you know, it wasn't, like, poorly made or anything. Like, I liked some of the ways it presented itself, you know. Obviously Stan Lee's dead, so they couldn't just, like, rush his ass over and say, can you answer these questions or whatever. Unless Disney has the power to bring people back from the grave, like, there was no way they could do that. So they kind of relied on, like, a mixture of, like, you know, old audio and, like, old documentary footage from Stan Lee in, like, previous interviews and stuff like that. And there were little bits that I kind of liked where they used like miniatures and, like, you know, like, I don't know the best way to say it, like dolls, I guess, of, like, Stan in his younger years and, like, the characters that he interacted with. You know, there were, like, miniatures of, like, you know, his publisher, of, like, Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and all these people. Like, I thought things like the choices like those were pretty inspired choices. My main issue with this documentary, though, is that it feels less like an honest, authentic documentary about Stan Lee's life, and more like some shitty fluff PR piece by Disney to kind of jerk off the fact about how they own Marvel now, and, like, Stan Lee is the guy responsible for the thing that gave them these billion-dollar movies and franchises. Like, this... In terms of the actual content, and I'm saying this as someone who is not an expert on Stan Lee. I'm not an expert on, like, comic book history or lore or anything like that. So, like, I didn't go in with that kind of bias. But even as someone who has very little knowledge and experience with things like that, this film felt so cherry-picked and so rose-tinted and almost felt kind of fantastical that I was like, okay, I don't know which parts they're leaving out, but I can definitely tell they're leaving out parts. Like, I can tell some, it didn't feel like they were making things up, but it definitely felt like they were twisting the truth just to make Stan Lee seem like this god, this, like, legend or whatever. And, you know, like, apparently, you know, the family members of Jack Kirby confirmed this, that they basically, like, twisted and, like, twisted the truth to make Stan look good. Like, they kept pushing the fact that Stan, he was the guy responsible for Spider-Man, he was the sole guy responsible for, like, the Hulk and Fantastic Four and all this other stuff. And, like, you know, the documentary kind of gets into, like, sort of, like, the creative, like, differences he had with Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby, but, like, again, these are so they completely move past these points just to continue jerking off about how great Stan is. But these were the parts that I wanted to learn more about. Like, I wanted an authentic, like, upfront, honest, like, story about Stan's life, not this weird PSA, like, rose-tinted, like, fairy tale Disney version of Stan Lee's life, you know? And, like, the last, like, 10 to 15 minutes of this film were genuinely, like, egregious. Like, the last 10 to 15 minutes was essentially just a jerk-off sesh about how great the MCU is, because that's what it was. Like, the last 10 to 15 minutes was just MCU footage, and I was like, really, Kevin Feige? Like, really, Disney? Like, did you have to... Like, could you not help yourselves and just shove all this, like, glorified, like, self-promotion about yourself, about how, look how great the MCU is or whatever. It was that for 10 to 15 minutes, and that pissed me off so much. I was, like, this was a really frustrating watch, and I don't, again, like, I'm trying to go about this in, like, kind of an unbiased, at least as unbiased and an objective way possible, but it's like, I feel like I can't authentically, you know, give this a positive rating despite how well made the documentary is, because of how kind of scummy and kind of how much the documentary feels like it's lying. It's like, I don't know, it's just, this feels wrong. Like, this is not, if you're looking for, like, an authentic, like, honest, like, very upfront documentary about Stan Lee's life, you're not gonna find it here. I suggest you go somewhere else. Like, literally just go to Wikipedia. You could learn more about Stan Lee's life on Wikipedia than you could from this documentary. Like, that's how kind of worthless it is in terms of, like, you know, learning stuff. So I gave this like a 5 originally, but like in retrospect, now that I think about it and talking about it, I'm dropping this down to a 4. I think that's a more appropriate rating. It's not a bad documentary, but it still feels inauthentic. So yeah. After that, I saw another film called Afire, directed by Christian Petzold. I hope I'm saying that name correctly. So apparently this is a very prestigious, very famous German director, and this is the same director as Phoenix and Undine, and I hadn't seen any of these films, but I at least heard of Undine, and I heard that one was great, so that's been on my watch list for a while. But yeah, I guess this is my very first Christian Petzold film, I guess, and I quite liked this one. I enjoyed this one thoroughly. I didn't think this was like amazing or anything, but for what it's going for, I thought this was like pretty good. So the film's about essentially just male insecurities when it comes to being an artist. So the film is about this writer who goes out to like an Airbnb house with his photographer friend, and there he meets a woman who also happens to be staying there, and it's this kind of like passive-aggressive, uncomfortable like confrontation where essentially the writer guy, he's insecure about kind of he's like an author, and like apparently he's going to be meeting with his publisher, his editor, about his latest book, and the few people who've read his book, like, they just say it sucks, it's awful, and stuff like that. He's kind of dealing with, like, the fact that, like, no one understands my book. I'm this, like, sort of S-tier giga brain kind of guy, and also that he kind of, like, looks down on other people. He looks down on the main girl that's staying with them, played by Paula Beer, where it's like, oh, she's just like an ice cream dealer, she wouldn't understand my great work and stuff like that. And they also meet this other guy, this guy named David, played by Eno Trebs. Again, hopefully I'm saying that correctly. It's like, oh, you're just like a swim guy, a lifeguard, you wouldn't know my great art, stuff like that. It's like, it's very much this like exploration on this guy who's just very much, like thinks of himself highly, thinks he's this like great writer and stuff like that, and it's just essentially just the characters bringing him down a peg. And I thought like the way they went about this character in this film was pretty interesting. Like, I liked a lot of the dialogue scenes. I really liked a lot of the conversations. It very felt like natural. It didn't feel like the director just like stood up on a soapbox and just like preached for like an hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever. And it felt like real people having real bits of dialogue. And I really like how the use of like forest fires are integrated with this theme as well. It's kind of like a sort of like, the conflict is getting bigger and bigger, and so the fire gets closer and closer to the characters and stuff like that. I like how that was intertwined, and overall, it's just like, it's a very minimalist type film. It's like, it's not going for anything like flashy or showy. There's no like crazy directing or anything like that. It's very much kind of like, it's almost like a bit theatrical in the sense where it's like, it's just letting the characters kind of play out and talk about their feelings and talk about their issues and stuff like that. And for the most part, I was really interested, like I was like pleasantly engaged from beginning to end. I didn't think anything was like amazing. I didn't think anything was like great or anything, but like it accomplishes what it wants to accomplish very well. And for the most part, I was just pretty entertained. I was pretty intrigued with what's going on. So yeah, I have more to say about this, but I feel like then I would have to get into spoilers, which I don't want to do, because I actually want people to watch this one. I want people to actually like kind of go in with like, a blind eye and stuff like that. So, and yeah, I thought this was really good. I quite enjoyed this one. I guess this is my favorite film that I saw at the Tribeca Film Festival. I'm deciding between that and Chasing Amy. But yeah, I can definitely say this was one of the better things I saw. So 7 out of 10. And the last film I saw at Tribeca Film Festival was Deep Sea. This is a Chinese animated film about stuff. And I'm like half joking with that, because it's definitely trying to go for so many things. It's like so balls to the wall. This one was kind of a fun experience, because in the sense that this was the only film I saw where I had to wear 3D glasses, so I got to see the film in 3D, and it definitely enhanced what was going on, because it's a very beautiful looking film. Like, this has some really, really nice animation. I wasn't really expecting the film to get kind of experimental with its animation, because there was a lot of like bits throughout this film where it kind of gets super, super trippy, where it's like, oh, it like kind of transitions into like watercolors. It's almost like kind of like The Tale of the Princess Kaguya or something like that, or like a Masaki Yuasa film where it gets like super colorful and super wild with like fish, like animation, like watercolor stuff like that. And, you know, there were bits of like 2D within this like mostly 3D animated like film that I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like, I think this is kind of interesting. My main problem with this film, though, are two things. One, the first half of this film was unbearable to sit through. This was one of the most cringe experiences I had at Tribeca. The first half of this film was genuine torture. Like, it was so unfunny. Like, it was trying to go for almost like an Illumination type thing. And I guess like this is just a common trope that I've been seeing in Chinese animated films, where like the characters are like wacky, but to the point that they're so over animated that like I hate everything that they say or like the way they act. And like I just can't get behind, like I just can't take seriously anything that the characters are doing. It's so over animated, and the humor is just so like pow pow, like look, we're doing crazy weird stuff, you know, we're weird and crazy, you know, like that was just the humor for the first half. And I just could not get behind that whatsoever. I was like genuinely cringing for the first half. Like, it was so chaotic in such a bad way that I was considering leaving the theater. But then I was like, well, you know what, this is the last thing I'll be seeing. I'll just stick around and see where this goes, type of thing. And surprisingly, the film gets better. In the second half, the film is more bearable to sit through. It's still not like great or anything, but it's like, it was like kind of like, okay, like this is at least more entertaining. But the last like 20 minutes, and again, I'm not going to spoil, kind of came out of nowhere. It was like kind of unpredictable. I was like, wait, hold on, what's going on? Like, it kind of threw me for a curve, where it's like, it's almost like a twist ending type thing, where it's like you thought that what was happening was like kind of one thing, but it turns out it was another thing. And I was like, oh wow, this is like kind of emotionally heartbreaking. This is kind of like tear-jerking. And the last like 5 minutes of the film really was that. It was like, oh wow, this is like kind of a big emotional payoff. I didn't think it was like 100% earned. I thought like there were some things where it's like, you didn't properly set up this character, you didn't properly set up this, but like in the moment I was like, but I guess like, but it also kind of accomplished what it wanted to achieve. It's weird. I think I need to rewatch this film. I do want to rewatch this film, because I feel like with this new context in mind from that twist ending, where it's like, I wonder how, I feel like I'll be more definitively clear about how I feel about this film in a second watch. But yeah, I mean, as of right now, who knows? Maybe I'll like it even more. Maybe I'll bump up my rating for this film a bit. But like, even then, it's like, aside from that, I still don't think this is like an amazing movie. I mentioned like 2 issues I had. The other issue was like, this was so derivative of Hayao Miyazaki, specifically Spirited Away. Like, this film is just essentially just kind of like a shitty ripoff of like so many different like Miyazaki films. Like, a bunch of it was like, this is just Spirited Away but bad, this is just Howl's Moving Castle but bad, this is basically Castle in the Sky but bad. It's like, you know, it's Ponyo but bad, you know, like it was so like, I understand that artists have their inspirations. Like, you can totally be inspired by an artist or by a director when making something, and you can certainly have an homage to that, you know, to that director. I think if it works well, it works well. But in here, it's just so painfully obvious and so painfully derivative. It's like, it genuinely bothered me. And, you know, if you've seen my previous videos, you know I'm a big Miyazaki fan. I'm a big Miyazaki stan, you know, so I was just having none of that. So who knows? Maybe I'll get used to that more, you know, in a rewatch. I don't know. Again, I feel like I'm kind of conflicted. I have a rating for this film, and you know, but I feel it's a very tentative rating. I would need to see this film again to kind of, for sure, you know, make clear about how I feel. But, you know, as of right now, I mean, I still think this is a film worth seeing. Like, if you ever get the chance to see this film, and I don't know if anyone in the States would be able to see this, but, you know, as of right, you know, this was a little better than I was expecting. I was expecting, like, kind of a train wreck, and it wasn't really that. I mean, the first half was kind of a train wreck, but, you know, whatever. Overall, still solid film. I want to see it again, but as of right now, 6 out of 10. I think that's a good score. So yeah, that was everything I saw at Tribeca. I also saw Past Lives and Asteroid City, but those aren't a part of the Tribeca Film Festival. I saw those independently of the festival, which is why I'm not reviewing either of those films, because I'm only reviewing the films I saw specifically at Tribeca. If you're interested in hearing my thoughts about either Past Lives or Asteroid City, comment below. I'll consider it. I might make a review for both of those if anyone is interested in them. But if you're curious, follow me on Letterboxd and see what ratings I gave for those. I really loved them, and in case you needed to hear me say it. But yeah, overall, this was a fun experience. I wish I saw more movies, but unfortunately, my schedule just didn't line up with just everything I wanted to see. I think if I've learned anything from this experience, it's that I think I need to be more selective. I think I need to be more picky with what I see at like a future film festival the next time I attend a film festival, because my mentality with Tribeca was that, I'll just see as many things as possible. I'll just see a bunch of random things and kind of see what I like and don't like and stuff like that. I think in a future attendance, I want to be more just sort of like, okay, I've heard great things about this, but I didn't hear great things about this, so I'll just kind of like dip my toe into this one sort of thing, like just overall just be more wise in terms of what I go see and just not see every single random thing ever. So, but overall, even though I didn't see the most amazing movies at Tribeca, I still had a fun time, and I would love to come back. But yeah, overall, those are the movies I saw at Tribeca. So like and subscribe and look out for future videos. Peace.